So it's page 302 if you have a Madani طبعة of the Mus'haf, and the ayah is number 83 of Surat AlKahf. Today we start the final story of the surah. We begin one of the most interesting and deep stories that exist in the Quran. I will have to give quite the introduction to it before we actually even start talking about it, but once we do, you'll find so if you thought the symbolism in the story of Musa and Al-Khadr meant something, if you listened to the symbolism there and thought that was meaningful and there was depth, then when you read this you're going to find it even more interesting. Why? Because this is the final stage. And when we talk about Surat AlKahf from a thematic point of view, let's go back to the beginning when we first started talking about Surat AlKahf. And I told you the theme of it is that it talks about the elements that you use to build communities, to build societies, to start civilizations. What are the elements that you need and how you're supposed to use them? The first element was the idea. You need the values. You need the compass from a moral and ethical point of view. You have to know what you believe in. You have to know what you want and why it is that you're doing what you're doing, or else there's no point of doing anything. Why would we care if there's a society or not if there's nothing to live for? You just enjoy, get the quickest highs that you can, and then just move on. But no, you need that set of values, that set of rules, those set of the conviction, the perspective. What is it that you believe in? Why do you believe in what you believe in? And that is the first story in Surat AlKahf. And it talks about Al-Kahf, and it's an amazing story because it shows you how only 3 individuals, very, very young, were capable of changing a kingdom long term, even though they didn't do much and they didn't live for too long. They died in their teens. And a few hundred years later, the whole kingdom had changed significantly. Everyone believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The idea. First of all, you need the idea. After you get the idea, you need the wealth. You need the financial strength. That's why the second story in the surah was the 2 men in the 2 orchards, Ashab al-Jannatain, right? And then in the third story, and that talks about the not compromising your principles, because money will come along and try and get you to deviate away a bit from what you actually believe in. But you need it still. Nothing can stand. No society can stand without money, right? And the third one was about knowledge, and the importance of knowledge not being just theoretical, but also being practical, right? And when you have all those 3, which was what we learned from Musa and Khadr alayhim assalam, when you finish studying, when you think about these 3 basic, isn't that what you need? If you have any society on the planet, you give it a strong idea, and then you give it wealth, and you give it science or knowledge, this society will stand up. And it will move to the final phase, the peak, the pinnacle of its civilization, of its rise. Right? The Prophet ﷺ didn't get to see the full cycle of his own effort. Tuwfi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, after establishing very strongly the idea. The idea had been established. The Muslims knew what they stood for. They knew what they believed in. They knew who they were. They knew why they were going to do what they were going to do. He left enough of them on earth so that this message could continue. Yes, a lot of people did ridda after, but that just proves my point, that there were many who didn't have the idea. The idea wasn't strong in them, so they fell off almost immediately when he passed away. But there were enough people who had the idea strongly in their hearts and their minds, they continued, right? But he wasn't there for the money. He wasn't there for the science and the knowledge. He wasn't there, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, 300, 400 years later, once the Islamic Empire reached its peak, and it was covering 3 continents, and it was the biggest empire that the world had ever seen up to that point, right? Well, I'm talking about the Islamic Empire in the beautiful days of in the golden age, right? Well, what about before that? You see, the Islamic Empire at its peak was the biggest that the world had seen. But before the Islamic Empire, there was another one that was the biggest that the world had seen at the time, right? In the story that we're going to read today. I mean, there is an example of a group, of a society, of a civilization that was capable of putting together the values, having the money, having the science, and then that translating into power, and then using it, right? And it's Dhul Qarnayn. It's the story of Dhul Qarnayn. Now, when you go and you try to understand or try to look for, traces of Dhul Qarnayn, right? And to see are there biblical or Old Testament versions of who he is. I believe the closest, of course there's a lot of different opinions, even if you study what the scholars say. The closest you'll come was probably Cyrus the Great. If you've ever heard of Cyrus the Great. He's known to be one of the earliest commanders or leaders who did something for human rights. And he was known to be one of the leaders who saved the Jews from persecution. And there's a lot, you can go study, and you find there's a lot of similes, there's a lot of parallels between Cyrus and between Dhul Qarnayn that is in the story, regardless of everything else related to what his story is. But you can, if you're interested, you can go kind of look into that a bit if you want to. Huh?
Alexander?
So I don't think it's Alexander at all. Alexander was a pagan. And so he was a mushrik, and that was pretty clear. However, Cyrus, there are statements that claim that he did believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there are things there are certain verses in the Old Testament that will kind of talk about that, even though he was not a Hebrew, so he was not a Jew. However, he was a believer, and that is you'll find evidence of that. Again, I'm not interested in going too much into the history or the comparative history. However, there is evidence of someone being of a king who was just, a king who was a muwahhid, and a king who spread a lot of good. And Dhul Qarnayn, the story that we're going to read here, he's going to talk to three groups of people, right? He's going to talk to three groups of people who lacked each group lacked something that this story talked about. So he's going to talk to a group of people who lacked the idea, or the values, the justice, the system. He's going to talk to a group of people who lacked the wealth, didn't have the money. He's going to talk to a group of people who didn't have the science, didn't have the knowledge. And then he's going to deal with a group of people who had the power and the science and the knowledge and everything, and used it for shar, and were corrupt. So you're going to see that, as from an Islamic perspective, once offered as a civilization, as a society, once offered the idea, the Quran gives you the idea. The money and the knowledge, the science, the theoretical and the practical is something that you have to go and you have to actually obtain. As a society, we have to go get it ourselves. But once you put them all together with the proper perspective, with the proper idea, then a lot of khair can come from it. And it doesn't have to always be corrupt politics. It doesn't always have to be that that there will be wars and there'll be death and there'll be blood and there'll be corruption. It doesn't always have to be like that. And Dhul Qarnayn is a living example in the Quran that shows us. Now here's an example of someone who actually did something, and he did it well. And it was something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself was happy with, and something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commended within the Quran and apparently in other books as well. So we're going to start reading this story. And as we go along, I'll kind of give more background as we move forward. So we start from ayah number 83. The page is number 302 in Surat AlKahf. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ويسألونك عن ذي القرنين. قل سأتلو عليكم منه ذكرا. And they ask you about Dhul Qarnayn. So if you recall, going back to kind of the beginning of the surah, there was a point where we talked about how the mushrikeen of Quraysh went to the Jews and they asked them, give us something that we can pin Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam down with, to say that he doesn't know what he's talking about. Give us three things that we can ask him. Give us a few things. So they told them about the 7 sleepers back in the day, and they told him to ask him about the man who walked the earth, or the man who ruled the earth, walking from its east to west. And they asked him about the soul. So we have 2 answers of the question in Surat AlKahf and 1 in Surat Al-Isra. وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الرُّوحِ. But both of them, 2 answers came in Surat AlKahf in the form of 2 stories that would basically put a surah, give a complete or a holistic approach of a very important and instrumental surah in the Islamic faith. Why? Because you have to remember something, that Al-Kahf is a surah you read it every week. There's really no other surah that's attached to. Maybe Surah Al-Fatiha has a part of Salah, Ayat Al-Kursi, read it after prayers. But for there to be a surah that you're required to read on a certain day of the week, this is the only one that we've got. And the Prophet ﷺ in certain hadith talked about the nur that it brings and the light to the heart. Why? Because every week when we come together, and you're supposed to read before Jummah, isn't that the sunnah? So before we actually come together and talk, we remind ourselves, this is how you build a society. This is our goal. We have to have the idea. We have to make sure that we obtain the wealth straight, non-compromised, ethically compromised manner. We have to have the knowledge, the proper knowledge, not the detached or disconnected or partially impaired knowledge, but actually the holistic. And then the power that comes from all of that has to be used for khair and justice and goodness. And every time we read this surah, it's a reminder. This is what we're supposed to be working for. This is what we're supposed to be trying to achieve. These are the natural steps in the natural development of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us in this book. And it's an important message for us before Jum'ah. Then we come to the khutbah and we listen to something that helps us achieve that. And that is the mentality, that's the idea that we're supposed to take from Surat AlKahf in the relationship with Salat al-Jumu'ah. So وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ ذِي الْقَرْنَيْنِ, and they ask you about ذِي الْقَرْنَيْن, the one with the two horns. Oh, right? So what was it? Was it that he had two long braids of hair, or that he wore a helmet that had two horns? We don't really know. But I think it's just like Majma' al-Bahrain. I think there's a lot of symbols. There's going to be a lot of symbolism in this story as well. You see, he had two things with him. He had the two elements of moving forward a society. Societies will lack one of two things. Either it's very materialistic and doesn't have the spirituality, right? Either it has the right idea but it doesn't have the authenticity. Either it's based on an idea but it's lacking the wealth and the knowledge. It's going to be something. Either it's the strength but there's no justice or fairness in it. Dhil Qarnayn is the endless paradigm of the thuna'iyat, of the two things that are needed for everything to stand. It's always something missing. When you look at modern day societies and we look at ourselves, there's always something missing. You're good at one thing, but then the other part that you're supposed to take care of is empty, or it's not there, it's not as strong. So Dhil Qarnayn, the way I see it, is that he's someone who carried both, which is very rare in history. It's very rare for a society to stand on ethical, spiritual values that are strong and clear, and that push you to be better and to improve and to build, and to have the materialistic and the possessions and the strength that will allow you to continue. It's very rare. We find one of the two. And what's interesting to me is that this story about Dhil Qarnayn talks about having both, and we'll see that meaning the paradigm of the duels within the story. You'll see it as you go along, and then when you look at how the Muslims stood up within 30-40 years, you'll see something very similar. The Islamic empire, the Islamic civilization that stood up for many years, for centuries, carried two things in its hands that today people don't think will ever work. Meaning, if you were to spend time with scientists or with even historians, you'll find that there's a strong narrative that says that religion and science have never been able to coexist. It's always been a continuous fight, and they refer to a lot of the problems that the Christians had and the Catholic Church and even the Orthodox Church have had with science. However, when you look at it from an Islamic perspective, when you look at the Islamic civilization, it's a different thing. They don't call it Islam; they call it the Arabs and the Persians, because it's not religious anymore. And they get to talk about the scientific achievements that happened, but they're referring it to the Arabs and the Persians. Yeah, but what were they? What brought the Arabs and the Persians together? They've never liked each other, and they still don't like each other, and they probably never will, right? But what brought them together to begin with? What was that thing that brought them both? It was the deen. See, in the Islamic, in the peak of the Islamic civilization, both came hand in hand. You will read and study about scholars of the madhab al-Hanafi who were at the same time astronomers and physicians, or scholars of usul and fiqh Maliki who were philosophers and known botanists or biologists. It was very, to be honest, the word alim was never used ever to someone who only knew Islamic knowledge, ever. You couldn't say the word alim. If you said the word alim, then you were talking to someone who encompassed the Islamic religion, the knowledge of the Islamic faith, and he also had something else that he was alim about. Like he was alim in something that was worldly knowledge. It was either algebra or biology or geology, something like that. It had to be something, if not many, if not all of them. Like at his time he had reached the highest level of education within those sciences, within the measurements and the relative understanding that they had at the time. But if he only knew fiqh, then he was called faqih, right? If he only knew hadith, he was called a muhaddith. If he only knew tafseer, he was called a mufassir. It was very simple. You wouldn't mufti. That's where the word sheikh came from. Where do you think the word sheikh came from? We stood in front of someone who only knew Islamic stuff, knew nothing else. What do we call him? We can't call him an alim or imam. Alim and imam is always associated with people who have brought they have the paradigm of the duels. You had two things. You have to have both. Dhil Qarnayn. You have to know both. If you don't know both, how are you going to apply what you know to the world if you don't understand the world at all? How does that work? If you don't understand the basic physics of how this planet works, to understand how life, why life continues and how life operates on this planet, then how does it work for you? There's too much missing. If you live inside the temple or inside the masjid, then how is it that you're going to offer anyone any help at all outside if you're not a part of their life to begin with? Are you understanding that the duels here? And that's another reason that we talked about that, like when we talked about Musa and Khidr, and it's a big problem that we have today. You have this detachment. This detachment, wallah, it's like a disconnection. Yani someone pulled the plug. And Islam exists only in certain realms, in certain places. And then the common man or the person who's walking, who's living life, can't seem to make sense of what's being said, and the answers aren't fulfilling, and the way of life doesn't seem to be working for them. Why? Because those who are studying the faith and then talking about how the modern version of it is going to be. And I'm not talking about version as in changing, but how we're going to be practicing in this within the differences that exist today in comparison to back then, to when the Prophet ﷺ came forward, aren't a part of life. So how is it going? It's not going to work. Does that make sense? So the word alim, even in the Islamic history, is only referring to someone who knew multiple things. Islamic knowledge was one of them, but obviously it wasn't the only thing, or else he would give a different name. Muhaddith, mufassir, faqih, usuli. There's different things you can say. Nahwi, if you knew only nahw. But if you're going to say the word alim, scholar, or imam, then you were talking about someone who was well-rounded in all the different sects of knowledge. So I believe that's what Dhul Qarnayn is kind of referring to. Right? It's talking about two things. It's bringing two things together. It's bringing the strength and justice. It's bringing spirituality and possession. It's bringing religion and science. It's bringing it together, the things that many people find difficulty bringing together. They're good at getting one of them, but the other one they struggle with. Dhul Qarnayn is the example of someone who was capable of doing it, and then the khair that comes from it. قُلْ, tell them, سَأَتْلُو عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا, I'm going to recite upon you from his story a part, dhikr, a remembrance, something to remember. So he's not going to tell us his whole story, but he's going to give us something from it, something to think about. If you want to know something about him, let me tell you something about him. قُلْ سَأَتْلُو عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. So then remember. So we start with the first two ayat, inshallah. إِنَّا مَكَّنَّا لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. إِنَّا مَكَّنَّا لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا. Now these two ayat are the most important in the story. So if you miss them as you're going along, then khalas, you've missed the whole thing, and nothing's going to make sense to you as you go along at all. So the first thing we're told, indeed, we have makkanna lahu fil ard. We have empowered him on earth. We have given him placement. We have strengthened his position. Tamkeen means that you don't have to move anymore, and this is your makan. This is where you are. You don't have to go anywhere. Like if you're not mumakkan, then someone can move you from your makan, and that's why these words this is where the word comes from. So makan is place. Tamkeen meaning you don't have to leave your place anymore. No one can push you out. No one can overpower you and then move you from where you are, because that is one of the biggest pains a human being can go through if you're thrown out of your country. So tamkeen means that you have enough power, you're empowered, you're strong enough, you're positioned, you can't be moved. So makkanna lahu fil ard. We had given him the empowerment and the strength on earth. Now, is there something that is attached to this meaning that word? Is it used elsewhere in the Quran? Of course, many times. And in the known ayah in Surah An-Nur, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مِنْكُمْ وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised those of you who believe in Him and do the deeds that they were created to do, لَيَسْتَخْلِفَنَّهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ, to give them the stewardship of the earth, وَلَيُمَكِّنَنَّ لَهُمْ دِينَهُم. Right? And then He will establish their religion for them. It cannot be moved anymore. It will not be thrown out. And that's something that I think the Muslims have got the first dose of. Inshallah, there's going to be a second and a third as we move along in our history. Hopefully we're not coming to the end yet. Inshallah. At least say inshallah. That inshallah this is not inshallah. At least don't contribute to it if it is. Makkanna lahu fil ard. So we gave him the strength. We empowered him here on the earth. Well, how, Ya Rab, did you do that? What was it that made him empowered on earth? The beautiful little phrase. وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. وَآتَيْنَاهُ, we gave him. Sababa, a means, or a mean. From what? Means of what? Everything. Min kulli shay. Everything. Means for everything. What do you mean for everything? Everything. You say, what do you have on your mind? Money? He had it. Knowledge? There. Values? 100%. Leadership? It was there. Followers? Definitely. Justice? 100%. Equity, equality, all of it. وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. There was a means for everything. And that is why مَكَّنَّا لَهُ فِي الْأَرْضِ. He was given the empowerment and the strength because he had means for everything. There is no other way for societies or civilizations to stand and to be able to own their own destiny and to dictate it unless they have means of everything. or means for everything. Impossible. Sababa, the word sabab here is very important. Don't you've heard, I think, the word used in different contexts where they say akhd bil asbab, right? Using the means. Where do you think they got that concept from? They got it from here, very simply from Surat AlKahf and the concepts that exist in Surat AlKahf. That Dhul Qarnayn was empowered on earth. He was given the strength, and he was able to position himself and to walk the earth. No one stood in his way. Why? آتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. He was given a means for everything. There was nothing missing in his kingdom, in his civilization. There was nothing that was missing. The values, the ethics, the money, the wealth, the strength, the proper values, the knowledge, the practical knowledge, the theory, everything was there. So he had a civilization. And it's funny, when you look at Qissat AlKahf at the beginning of the surah, just a couple of guys, 3 people. How about 3 people? The idea, only 3 people. Talked about the wealth, 2 guys. Talked about Musa al-Khadr, maybe Isha, 2 or 3 guys. And then when this story came, he's a part of a group. He's going to be a part, it's not about on his own. He is leading an army. He has a civilization now. Now it's ripened, and it's come to the point where the community is there, where the civilization is there. It's no longer 1 or 2 people. It's no longer a story of a couple of individuals who are doing certain things. That's usually how it starts. It starts with a few people. He started sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he was alone. He had Khadija, then Abu Bakr, then Umar, Abu Bakr, then Uthman, right? Then Ali. So slowly kept on moving from one person to the other. Bilal, Talha, Sa'id, Zubair, Abdul Rahman, Abu Ubaidah. And it kept on moving one person to the other until it became what it became later. But it started with a couple of people with an idea. And they stuck to their idea to the point where they had some ability to do more, and they moved on to gaining a bit more wealth and gaining a bit more knowledge, holding on to their values and their list of ethics and principles, and then they were able to stand, and they were able to do khair with what they had. So anyway, when you study about, and if you look up Cyrus the Great, and you read a bit about him, it's a very interesting story, or the story that exists. Why? Because it talks about someone who did not enforce his own faith on others. Like, he would come to a group of people, and if they didn't believe in God, that was their problem, and he wouldn't persecute them, wouldn't kill them. There was no rape happening at the time. It's a very interesting story when you look at it because you don't find stories like that go back in history. Usually stories that are historical that go back that far, 5 to 30 BC or something. Then you're usually talking about the level of brutality is much higher, right? And then we're going to see the first encounter that he's going to have. Well, if he had min kulli shay'in sababa, then what is he going? فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا. فَأَتْبَعَ, then he followed the means, or then he followed the cause, or then he continued to follow more means. You never stop. There's always room for improvement. If you're given the strength, if you're given the idea, and you're given the wealth, and you're given the knowledge, and you're given the status and the power, then now you have the ability to do khair. Then you can do khair at this point. فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, and he followed the mean. He didn't sit around doing nothing. He followed the mean. Wherever the mean took him, wherever he felt that goodness could be done, wherever he felt that there was something that could be fixed, that there was a sabab to be taken, meaning there was a proper logical next step that needed to be taken, he took it. He went فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, and the Quran uses the word sababa again, which means mean, or it means the practical next step, or something that is dictated through the logic of life. When you look at life from a rational point of view, what do we need at this point? Then فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, you follow that cause, and you get it, and you obtain it so that you can stand, so you can continue doing what you're doing. فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا alayhi salam. He continued to follow the mean. All right. He's going to start by going west. Right? He's going to go west. He's going to encounter the first group of people that this story talks about. So we read the story, inshallah, and then we explain it. حتى إذا بلغ مغرب الشمس وجدها تغرب في عين حمئة ووجد عندها قوما قلنا يا ذا القرنين إما أن تعذب وإما أن تتخذ فيهم حسنا
إما أن تعذب وإما أن تتخذ فيهم حسنا
قال أما من ظلم فسوف نعذبه
قال أما من ظلم فسوف نعذبه
ثم يرد إلى ربه فيعذبه عذابا نكرا
ثم يرد إلى ربه فيعذبه عذابا نكرا
وأما من آمن وعمل صالحا
وأما من آمن وعمل صالحا
فله جزاء الحسنى
فله جزاء الحسنى
وسنقول له من أمرنا يسرا.
وسنقول له من أمرنا يسرا.
The only reason that he was capable of moving from one place to the other is وَآتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا. And the only reason he was given a mean for everything is that the way he lived was فَأَتْبَعَ سَبَبًا, that he continued to pursue the means, to look for the reasons of strength, the reasons for empowerment, the reasons for strong positioning within this world, and he followed them and he got them. When we talk about religion and the need that we have, the necessity that we have to strengthen our status as Muslims, this is not something that the religion needs. No, this is having that strength is something that the religion does. I'm going to repeat that again because this is an important differentiation here. They're very different. Strengthening the status of the Muslims, or empowering the communities, or empowering the Muslim Ummah, is not something that Islam needs. No, this is something that religion does. Religion is the set of principles and ideas and values that no civilization can stand up without. Meaning there is no civilization on earth that stood up without a set of values. I'm not saying that they all had the Quran, but they had a set of values. Some of these values were good and some of them were not. For example, for the civilization we are a part of right now, we're living in now, the Western civilization. It's been standing up for years now, and it's getting stronger, or maybe it's not at this point. I don't know anymore where it is in its cycle of life as a civilization. But regardless, it still stood up on a number of values. Correct? If you take the time to study this civilization, you can track back those values, and you can find a set of rules that they build this based on. And because they had these rules, they were capable of doing what they did. Now, I'm not arguing those rules. This is not the point. I don't want to say, oh, the good rules or bad rules. That's not the thing. What I'm saying is what religions do is that they offer you the set of rules and principles and ethics and morals and fundamentals that you are going to use in order for you to stand up. This is what you need. We can't do it without a set of rules. You can try and stand up without these set of rules. You can do it, but you won't do it as well. It won't be full of khair, and it won't last as long. I'm saying the idea here, you're given something way better. So it's not that Islam needs this. Islam does that. So if we're not where we are, if we're not there, that means we haven't understood the faith properly yet. Or we have failed to continuously understand it. Or we stopped at some point comprehending what the faith is supposed to do for us. And we broke it down or reduced it to something much less than it ever was to begin with. Because if you did understand it and practice it properly the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent it, then taking these steps and moving to the point of what is something similar to what Dhul Qarnayn is going to be the natural movement. It's the natural progress of what happens. We don't need the Quran in order for us to stand. But if we do have the Quran, then we should be standing up by now. And if we're not, then there's a defect in the way that we're dealing with it. Does that make you understand the difference? It's a very important difference here. There's something missing in the way we're dealing with this. And if you're going to say, well, you have the set of rules, meaning you have the values that you agree on with everyone, meaning you know why you're here and what you're here to do and where you're going, it's all clear to you, then what's wrong? Then what's wrong with your vectors? Why are they going in all the opposite directions? Why isn't it focused in one? Because you guys, if it's there, you should be agreeing to it. And then that kind of states the question that maybe a revision of ourselves, to revise the way we view it, and to what extent we're willing to commit to it, and to sacrifice our time, to sacrifice our comfort in understanding the deen and holding on to it. So he goes, حَتَّى إِذَا بَلَغَ he follows the sababa. He follows the means. He continues to follow the means to keep himself doing what needs to be done. You continue to follow the means. He follows. بلغ مغرب الشمس. He comes to the end. So of course there's a lot of misunderstandings of it. He didn't come to where the sun doesn't dip somewhere and then that's where it's setting in the west. No, meaning he came to the part of the earth where to the west where there's nothing after him, or it's just water. He doesn't know if there's anything after that, and that's called Maghrib al-Shams, where the sun sets and it keeps on going, and there's really no earth, there's no land after that. It's not talking about. This is used sometimes by non-Muslims that say, well, your Quran says that the sun dips into. No, that's not what it means at all. You come to a point of the earth, probably back then. This is the old, either somewhere in Western Europe, Spain, or Western, what is it today, Morocco or Mauritania, something where there's no land anymore. We don't know exactly. I really don't know where this is. But he came to Maghrib al-Shams, as far as he could go west. حتى إذا بلغ مغرب الشمس وجدها تغرب في عين حمئة. He found that it was setting upon a place that was عين حمئة, which is a muddy spring. عين is a spring, and حمئة is muddy spring. Now, what is that referring to? عين حمئة, or muddy spring, means that there's good soil that is good for growing things, and there's water. طين or حمئة means that there's something that is it's not dry nor is it flooded. It's عين حمئة, mean this is good. This is land that you can from an agriculture point of view. There's a lot of money here. There's a lot of wealth in this place. They're not poor. They're not hungry. وجدها تغرب في عين حمئة ووجد عندها قوما. He found a group of people who were living there in this very, very proper land for growth. What is their problem? Their problem is that there's dhulm. They're oppressors. They don't have what we would call today the law. They don't have law, and because they don't have the law, they continuously oppress each other, and they don't have the values. They don't have the set of ideas that will govern their society to make sure that there's going to be adl, that there's going to be justice or fairness. And because of that, even though they had the resources of wealth, and it didn't do them any good, meaning they were failing. And Dhul Qarnayn, when he arrived there was no resistance at all. This is what he saw. تغرب في عين حمئة, land that has muddy springs, water, and it's good soil. And there's people. But these people, they're not قلنا, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Dhul Qarnayn was given. He was given this choice at that point. إما أن تعذب وإما أن تتخذ فيهم حسنا. Now, what are we going to do with people who are oppressors, who oppress themselves and have no laws? What are you going to do? Tu'adhib? This is an important part of the surah. Because sometimes you're powerful and you come to people who are worthy of punishment. So what are you going to do? Are you going to punish them? Tu'adhib? وَإِمَّا أَن تَتَّخِذَ فِيهِمْ حُسْنًا. Or are you going to take away with them that is husna? Husna means that has goodness in it. Are you going to take away that is going to lead to goodness? Yes?
Where did it say that there was dhulm there?
Hold on. So the ayah after قال, so what he said, and this is the example of why Dhul Qarnayn, the story of Dhul Qarnayn is of someone who had fairness and justice. قال أما من ظلم, right? قال أما من ظلم فسوف نعذبه ثم يرد إلى ربه فيعذبه عذابا نكرا. As for the one who oppresses, as for those who continue to oppress, then we will punish them. And then when they turn back to their Lord, they will find a worse punishment than they found with me here. وَأَمَّا مَنْ آمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا. And as for those who believe and are pious and do the deeds that are good, فَلَهُ جَزَاءً. They will be given as a reward الحسنى. The husna is the best, or the easiest, or the best goodness that we can offer them. Meaning, we come to this group of people. They have the wealth, but they don't have the values and they don't have the laws. We're going to enforce a law that will make it all fair. Those who oppress will be punished. Then they will be turned. Then when they go back to their Lord, they will find worse punishment. And those who don't, those who do the job that they need to do, those who spend their time and spend their effort in something that is khair, then we will reward them. Al-husna, they will be given. We'll make sure that they are encouraged to do more, and they'll be given status, and they'll be given فَلَهُ جَزَاءً الْحُسْنَى وَسَنَقُولُ لَهُ مِنْ أَمْرِنَا يُسْرًا. And then we will say to that person from our amr. Min amrina means from our understanding, or from our point of view, or from our status, or from our perspective. Yusra, the ease. We will give them ease. We will be easy with them. We will help them. We will support them. We will give them the best that we can. And those who oppress will be punished. He will lay down the law.
So Allah is giving him the choice either to do this or
so this is the reason that قُلْنَا يَا ذَا الْقَرْنَيْنِ is the example that is important for us to understand. When you have that power, you're always given that choice, aren't you? When you are that powerful, when all the means of strength and power are given to you, when you have the values and you have the wealth and you have the knowledge and you have the status and it's all there, now you have the ability to make a lot of choices, because you will come upon falling civilizations. The Ayn al-Hami'ah, the way I see it is, so a muddy spring, a spring that it's not gushing water. It's almost symbolism to something that's kind of coming to its end. They're a weak civilization. They're falling. See, when civilizations like that are falling, the only thing that helps really is the law. The law can sustain it. Good example, I think where we are right now. It's the law. Right? It's not really the ethics, it's not the morals, it's not the values, it's not the common cause that we live for. It's just the law. The law will keep everyone doing what they do. Even if the civilization's concepts and principles and values are falling quickly, are crashing to the ground, the law will keep it up for as long as it can. So he came to a group of people. There's two ways to look at this story that that offer a similar way of understanding. Maybe different, but a similar perspective. He was given the ability to do what. Okay, you're falling. You don't have the values. Here's the value. Here's the law. The law will keep the land going, and it probably did. And it probably continued, because there's really no continuation to the story. It wasn't poverty here. The problem wasn't that they had nothing. The second story you'll see is a bit different. It wasn't that they didn't have any wealth. It's that they didn't have justice. Right? The idea wasn't there. Isn't that the first story of Surat AlKahf? The idea. You have to have the values. Once you compromise them, once you find ways to justify no longer following those values, khalas, that's the first step of falling. You've already fallen. It's just a matter of time now. Right? The moment corruption enters any system, khalas, it's going to fall. Just wait back and get the popcorn and just wait. It's going to fall. It's impossible. It cannot continue. Now, time is relevant or relative. Sometimes it'll take longer than others, but it will fall because you've already messed with the core values of what allowed them to stand up in the first place. And that's why what I think is worthy of us, for all of us to do, is that we revise the core values of the deen, the reduced concepts that exist within Islam, the concepts that when presented to the Sahaba and to the Prophet ﷺ back then actually changed the way they viewed things, like tawakkul, like taqwa, like istighfar, like iffa, came like khushu'. Like these are concepts that were given, words that were coined. These are phrases that didn't exist before. Tawakkul, go open a dictionary, look for the word. You find that this word was used by Arabs before Islam with the same concept. No, wakala or wakil is someone who's going to take care of your matters when you're not around. But tawakkul as a concept, didn't have a meaning. The Quran coined the phrase. It was a phrase that was used. Why? Because it was a concept that you need to explain. It doesn't have a synonym in the Arabic language. We have to sit down and explain to you what it means and how it's going to change the way you view things and how it's going to change the way you carry yourself in your life. And then it turned into something totally different. Istighfar, a very strong concept, it was turned into just, and then that's the end of it, or you say it during prayer. But it doesn't have a meaning anymore. It doesn't carry something, doesn't mean something to you, that it doesn't allow you to view the world differently, or it's not a frame of mind or a mentality that will continue with you. And this is what happens when civilizations fall. When any civilization falls, what happens is that the great values that once got it on its feet are reduced. That's why they're reduced to rituals or superficial or trivial celebrations that don't really mean anything anymore. So even now, if I say ittaqillah, to you it just means stop doing what you're doing. That's all you listen to, and sometimes you don't even listen to it. Like it's just whatever, you go away. Ittaqillah had a meaning. Taqwa was a very important concept that carried tasbih, alhamd. Aren't these concepts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us? What do? Are they just something you count on a masbahah? Or was it actually a frame of mind that changed how people saw the world and saw their role within this world? Right? And I think a lot of that has been taken away. The concept of rahmah, what does that mean? Compassion, al-atf, there's so many other words that mean empathy and compassion. Rahmah is a very specific word that exists in the Quran as well. It's a very specific word that is used. That had a different meaning before Islam came, and then when Islam came, it gave it a meaning that was different that people had to learn to deal with. And it became a part of the way I practiced and the way I lived. When you lose the values, khalas, it falls. Basically, you've taken out the pillars from under this civilization. It's going to fall. It's just a matter of time. The law will only do so much. But he came to people, Show me your values, Ya Dhul Qarnayn. You come to people who don't have values. Show me your values. What are you going to do? Right? They're oppressors. What are you going to do to them? Yeah? No, we're going to be fair. We're going to put a system of law for them so that we're fair. أَمَّا مَنْ ظَلَمْ will be punished, and أَمَّا مَنْ آمَنَ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا, they're going to be treated in the best of ways. Simply. You could have done the opposite. Look at stronger bodies or stronger systems or civilizations that exist today. Do they treat everyone else in the same way, or even remotely similar? Is there any justice in the way that they function? Is there? Not much. Right? He could have easily just taken their khayrat. He would have come to their ayn hamiyah and just taken all the resources that they had, عذبهم, and then kicked them out or killed them, and justified it by the fact that they were oppressors anyway, like they were garbage. The way that they functioned was garbage. They're not worth it. Easily, but no, justice. The first thing is that Dhul Qarnayn established for us the strength of the idea that he had, or not the idea, the ideology that he carried, or the values and the principles and the set of rules that he was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he understood. And that is why he stood up. He came to people who didn't have it, and yet he treated them the way. Understanding people who lacked what he had, and we got to see how he dealt with them, having those set of rules. That's the first story for Dhul Qarnayn. He's going to continue. We read the one after it, inshallah. ثم أتبع سببا حتى إذا بلغ مطلع الشمس وجدها تطلع وجدها تطلع على قوم لم نجعل لهم من دونها سترا
وجدها تطلع على قوم لم نجعل لهم من دونها سترا
كذلك وقد أحطنا بما لديه خبرا
كذلك وقد أحطنا بما لديه خبرا.
And then ثم أتبع السبب. Again, the pursuit of the means of continuously looking for what the next step is. He continues to follow them, and it takes him to the far east, where محل ما تطلع الشمس, where the sun rises. We find that the sun rises amongst people. لم نجعل لهم من دونها سترا. There's nothing sheltering them from it. Meaning they're living probably in that ground zero type of life. People who didn't really have much, barely enough clothing to cover themselves. لم نجعل لهم من دونها سترا means that they're not capable of, they're at a point where they really don't know how to even shelter themselves from the sun that is rising every day. Very poor. The problem here is financial. The first one was ideological, was based on values. Here they're poor. كذلك. كذلك means, and he did for them what he did for the first group. He offered them what was missing. That's why وَقَدْ أَحَطَنَا بِمَا لَدَيْهِ خُبْرًا. And indeed we know, and we have encompassed everything that he possessed. خُبْرًا. We had the clear or profound knowledge. We had encompassed with our knowledge everything that he possessed, everything that Dhul Qarnayn possessed. Meaning he had something to offer. He had the possession. He had the materialistic ability to actually help them. كذلك, just like he did with the first group, he did with this group. That's what كذلك here means. It's comparing what he did with the first group with the second group. This second group is probably not the law that they need. This group need to eat. They need to find. They need to be given the basic needs of life to actually continue with themselves. كذلك. So he offered it to them, just like he offered what the first group needed. He offered this group what they needed. وَقَدْ أَحَطْنَا بِمَا لَدَيْهِ خُبْرًا. And indeed, we have encompassed with the deep knowledge, khubra, with every part of the knowledge, everything that he had. بِمَا لَدَيْهِ, what he had possessed. So we knew what he had, and he offered from what he had. The second story. So when you look at it, it's the same sequence of what Surat AlKahf has talked about. Ahl al-Kahf talked to us about the idea, about the values, about the principles, about the ethics, about the rules, right? The fundamentals. The second story was about the wealth, right? So the second group he encounters are people. The third group he's going to encounter, if you do the same sequence, right, it's going to be knowledge, right? Ilm. And you're going to find that in the first few words in the story. There are people who know nothing, who barely know how to speak. There are people who, when it comes to their knowledge, they don't have knowledge. Even though they have all the resources, they're not poor. They don't lack numbers. They don't lack money. The final group is the most interesting, of course, and this is where the climax of the story comes. But they're a group that don't lack they don't lack wealth, they don't lack numbers, they just lack, they're just very ignorant. They didn't have the knowledge that was needed. So we'll move on to the next one. ثم أتبع سببا حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين وجد من دونهما قوما لا يكادون يفقهون قولا قالوا يا ذا القرنين إن يأجوج ومأجوج مفسدون في الأرض فهل نجعل لك خرجا على أن تجعل بيننا وبينهم سدا ثم أتبع سببا, and he continued to seek and to pursue the means حتى إذا بلغ بين السدين, until he came to a place between two mountains, or between two large, you could say dams as well. But the word saddain, the word sad is usually used for mountains. So he came to people who were living between two high mountains, بين السدين. And I think there's some symbolism we'll talk about in a second. وَجَدَ مِن دُونِهِمَا, he found between these mountains, or at the foothills of these mountains, قوما, a group of people, population, لا يكادون يفقهون قولا. They have very little knowledge of even how to speak. يفقهون قولا, or they don't understand what they're being told. Meaning, which is the proper way of understanding this ayah. لا يكادون يفقهون قولا means they barely understand what is being said to them. So Dhul Qarnayn is speaking to them, he's explaining things to them, and they don't understand much. Their comprehension is very low. Meaning, he found out he's talking to people who are very, very simple, who don't seem to understand much, who haven't really educated themselves much. It's not something they're interested in. So he is someone who آتَيْنَاهُ مِن كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا, who has been given the means for everything, and science and knowledge is something that he understands. You're going to see how that's all going to be very clear in this story as we go along with it. But they don't seem to understand anything. Yes?
Could this be like a language barrier, or?
Could be, but I don't see, I feel. So again, when you go and you read in the Tafseer, you find that they say that he needed 28 different translators to actually finally understand the language that these people he spoke. I don't know. I find these stories are more I guess mythical than they are actually the point. When you look into the Quran and what the Quran uses in terms of the choices that the Quran makes when it talks about certain things and then leaves other things out. You see, go back to the beginning. That's why I talked about that at the beginning of the story. What does the story say at the beginning? قُلْ سَأَتْلُ عَلَيْكُمْ مِنْهُ ذِكْرًا. I'll tell you a few things about his story, right? So everything that this story tells us, every word here is worthy. Because the story is huge. It's a long story. There's a lot to tell. But the Quran just chose certain things. So why would this be of any importance whatsoever? Right? Like why would لا يكادون يفقهون قولا be of any importance? What is there for us at all to learn from? Easily that could have been left out and continued, and you would still understand this. Meaning right now, your understanding of this story, how does that part offer you anything? Before we've done this, you've known this story, you've heard this story at one point or the other, right? This is not the first time you've heard this story altogether. So when you knew that لا يكادون يفقهون قولا, what did that mean to you? Understand my question here? What did it offer you, like in terms of depth of the story, or something you could learn from?
They are ignorant.
Sorry?
Next to their violence.
The violence of whom? But he's not talking to Ya'juj and Ma'juj here.
But you understand from it that they're brutes.
Sure.
But he's not talking to Ya'juj and Ma'juj here. He's talking to the people.
Yeah. So my question is, what does the knowledge? What does us knowing that they couldn't understand what Dhul Qarnayn is telling them? What does that offer us in terms of the story? That's the question.
His
That
vision.
was kind of the answer to that. Allah Ta'ala is saying that people who lack understanding, particularly violent people.
Okay. which is the point, which is exactly what we're trying to say, that they lacked understanding, that there was a lack of understanding, when there's a lack of knowledge, when there's a lack of education, basically, right? There are people who are not going to be able to take care of themselves, which is basically what the story is we're going to end up finding out in the story, that they don't lack wealth, and they don't lack either the numbers to actually take care of themselves. It's just they because they lacked education, they weren't an educated group of people. They weren't capable of actually doing what they needed to do. Meaning they became violent, and they became and they couldn't govern themselves, and they couldn't take care of themselves, which is the point. So لا يكادون يفقهون قولا has merit here in the story, specifically if you look at how Surat AlKahf kind of progresses. It moves from talking about the three basic elements, and he came by three people. Right? It's like us being told here, you've achieved. Imagine that you've finally achieved all three basics, and that you had the idea, the wealth, and the knowledge, and that led you to having power. Now imagine coming by people who lacked one of them. Come by people who lacked the values, or came by people who lacked the wealth, or came by people who lacked the knowledge. Every time you'll come by them, you'll find that there's ajiz in their narrative, meaning that they feel helpless, or there's a level of helplessness, and there's something missing. There's something missing of what they got, because there's something that's not there. In this story, when he came bayna saddain, right, the problem was the level of education, the level of understanding, the level of comprehension. لا يكادون يفقهون قولا. قالوا, what they said is, يا ذا القرنين. Apparently ذا القرنين was known at the time. He was someone who was not, the name was heard of. إما يا ذا القرنين إن يأجوج ومأجوج مفسدون في الأرض. So Gog and Magog, which are basically two tribes that our understanding is that they descend from Yafith ibn Nuh alayhi salam. That's the understanding. But they represent in the Quran the chaos. They are present in the Quran, because when you take the origin of the word in Arabic, Ya'juj comes from Ajaja, and Ma'juj comes from Majaja, so it comes from the root word. Ajaja is when there's a fire. Ajaj al-lahib, or Ajj al-lahib. So it's talking about something that burns. Majja is when something is mixed together and it ruins it. In the known hadith, when Aisha says something about Safiya that being short, like she said something about her, فقال يا عائشة لقد قلت كلمة لو مزجت بماء البحر لمزجته, and another way لمجته, meaning that if you had put what you said as a word that if it was thrown into the ocean would have ruined it and turned it into something that's no longer viable, or something no longer supports life. So Ya'juj and Ma'juj has even the origins of the word have corruption in, or have chaos, or have destruction, or have something. There's something there that talks about adha, or harm, in different ways. So they're saying inna Ya'juj wa Ma'juj mufsiduna fil ard. They are corrupting the earth, or they cause a lot of chaos or terror here on the earth and where we live. فهل نجعل لك خرجا? Can we offer you kharj? Kharj means kharj is the word that they use for taxes. Or and the origin of the word kharj is when we give you an allowance, or we pay you something for doing this for us. Now they didn't want to say pay you for it, because he was much stronger and he had way more wealth than they did. So they didn't want to tell him, we'll pay you for it here, but we'll get, how about a gift, kharjan. Ala an taj'al, or kharjan here, the meaning what they're looking for is that we become a part of your kingdom, and this becomes taxes. So we pay the tax. وَتَجْعَلْ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَهُمْ سَدًّا, and you put something between us, meaning you put a dam or a barrier that will keep them away from us. Now I'm going to stop at that point of the story, because it's 9 o'clock. But next time we'll continue. This is when we talk about it, you will find the explanation of what I talked about in the first two encounters more clear. Meaning his responses, Dhul Qarnayn, how he deals with them, what he says when they offer him that, how he actually continues to work with them, and what he offers them at the end. It'll clarify for you the set of values that he had, the amount of wealth that he had, and the amount of knowledge that he had. Right? So if آتَيْنَاهُ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ سَبَبًا, we gave him the means to everything. Still isn't clear. When you see the way he kind of answers the questions to this group of people that he's going to help, you will find that he has all the elements that the surah has talked about. And you will see the sequence of how it all moves forward. Inshallah, we'll continue next time after Surat Isha. جزاكم الله خير. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.